I want to bring in CNN's senior political commentator and former senior advisor to President Barack Obama, David Axelrod here. Obviously, Ax, we had been waiting to see if this was actually going to happen. First, we haven't heard from you yet. What's your reaction to President Biden exiting the 2024 race?
Yeah, Caitlin, you know, I got the news on a plane coming into New York, and you know, it was I was very sad, honestly. I think it was necessary. It's important. It's an incredibly important decision and difficult decision that he made for the country, but not the final chapter that he imagined, and not maybe the final chapter that he deserved. But there is a real focus on the question that he has put in front of people again and again and again, and that is, who and how can the Democratic Party defeat Donald Trump? And I think in that regard, the party took a step forward today, and the president recognized it and did the hardest thing you can do and stepped aside.
I mean, Van Jones was talking earlier about what a tough decision this must have been for President Biden. And when you look at it in the grand scheme of things, I mean, to go from a little over 3 weeks ago, showing up in Atlanta to debate Donald Trump, and then to this decision now is a pretty quick time span in the grand scheme of things. But I wonder what you made, given you were a senior advisor to President Obama, in his statement, obviously thanking Biden for his service, commenting on his exit from the race, but not going as far as to endorse Harris or anyone to take the top of the ticket. Is that posturing on his part, or do you think that's just him taking a moment before getting involved and lining up behind someone else as the next nominee?
Look, I think that, again, I think the focus of many leaders in the party is going to be singular, and it's going to be how and who can defeat Donald Trump. And that may well be Kamala Harris. You know, I think some of her supporters have done her a disservice because they say, well, she's there, you know, she's historic, you can't bypass her, and so on. The real case they should be making is why she'd be the strongest candidate. And there are some really strong arguments to suggest she would be, but she might be stronger if she comes through a process that is open. And I noticed in her own statement, she said she wanted to compete and earn the nomination. And it would be good for her if that was the conclusion that people drew. She's certainly capable of doing that. She's the only one who's being discussed who's actually been swimming in the deep end of the pool. Running for national office, president or vice president, is unbelievably hard, and no one who hasn't done it has any idea, no matter what you've run for before. You know, she may be battle scarred, but she's also she's battle tested in a way others aren't, and they should be making that case. But I think that people are going to take a hard look at this, try and open up the process and see if others step forward. Others may not, but she would be in a stronger position if she can say, I went through a process and I emerged as the nominee of the Democratic Party by dint of that process, and not just as a gesture by the president to hand me this nomination.
David, I think for people watching, understandably, what's happened just in the last week alone has been seismic in U.S. politics. But I think if you look over the last 6 months, I mean, Donald Trump, the candidate, Republican nominee, he was then presumptive, was convicted of 34 felonies. There was an attempted assassination of him 8 days ago. And then today we see a sitting president take himself out of the running. I just, from a historical perspective, it's a lot to process.
It really is. I mean, you know, look, I've lived through a lot of these election cycles, and I really haven't seen anything quite like this since the 60s, you know, when we had several assassinations. Robert Kennedy appeared as if he had seized the nomination the night he won the California primary and was killed that night, or shot that night and died 2 days later, and threw the party into turmoil. We had a very tumultuous convention in Chicago. Hubert Humphrey emerged as the nominee. He was the vice president for Lyndon Johnson and carried some of the burden of Johnson and the Vietnam War with him, and almost won anyway, lost by a point, closed very fast. But that whole year it was one unthinkable thing after another. It feels a little bit like that now. And the thing that we probably need to focus on is the fact that there is an election coming in November, and I think that election has changed in a dramatic way today. Donald Trump, he certainly was a colossus in Milwaukee last week, but in the rest of the country, not so much. He's a vulnerable candidate and can be beaten, and Democrats are going to begin to focus on that. There's a lot of sadness about the president, a lot of love and affection for him, but I think people are also steeled to the task at hand.
Yeah, I spoke to Trump moments after Biden put out this statement, and he called him the worst president in U.S. history. And then he said that he does believe Harris would be easier to beat. Obviously, we don't know if that's who he'll be facing in this election, but this is not just uncertainty for Democrats, it's uncertainty for the Trump campaign as well. David Axelrod, stand by because I want to get back to you, but we also have Abby Phillip here joining, CNN anchor and CNN's senior political correspondent. And Abby, I mean, this is just such a seismic moment in this campaign. I wonder what you're hearing from Democratic sources, from donors about what this new landscape looks like now.
Yeah, Caitlin, I've been talking to a number of people today and definitely over the last several days. And the big thing right now is how quickly can Vice President Harris consolidate this field. And I spoke with a top fundraiser for the Biden-Harris campaign who's in touch with dozens of donors who said, right now, this is hers to win or to lose. And frankly, she has 24 to 48 hours to do so. But this person did not believe that there was any sort of truly organized effort to push someone else other than the vice president, which is something that is key in these moments. There is certainly a faction of donors who want an open process. They want to see if there's perhaps someone else who might be stronger against Trump, but that is not at this moment organized in any sort of way. And so that leaves the vice president in a really strengthened position. And this person also said that the donors are prepared to back her, and that's going to be critically important. This is being viewed by many people in the Democratic Party as the path of least resistance. She has the clearest path to inheriting the campaign infrastructure, the clearest path to inheriting the money that has been raised by the Biden-Harris campaign up until this point. And the other thing, talking to another source who's very close to the vice president, there is a lot of concern about the really compressed timeline right now to get all of these ducks in a row. There are so many decisions that need to be made, so many parts of this that are completely unknown, and even the people who are the most supportive of her, who want this to eventually end up with the vice president as the top of the ticket, they are worried, is how this person put it to me. So look, the next day or two are going to be extremely critical. One of the other factors in all of this is going to be which candidate is best positioned to actually get the delegates, because that's really where this ends up at this point. And many people close to the vice president have stressed to me there are a lot of structural and political reasons why she is by far in the best position. When we talk about the importance of black voters and black delegates are to this Democratic Party, that's not just a talking point. It's a real practicality about where the powerhouses are within the Democratic National Committee. And those are the people in the coming days who are going to decide how this goes and who this goes to. And I imagine shortly after that, the discussion about who would be her running mate is going to accelerate as well. I'm already hearing, as I'm sure you are as well, a lot of whispers about that as well, Caitlin.